I think these are great points, and I want to digress for a second and also point out that, one of the other offensive things that's said about poor people, particularly inner city poor people, well, I go down there and these are basically racist, rich people talking. I go down there and they're all overweight and they're this and that. Well, the fact is, there have been studies done, as you know, that lower income communities, they don't have the holistic grocery stores. They don't have the low cost vegetables and fruits are much more expensive in inner city supermarkets, and if you can get to one, and so people are forced to rely on fast foods. Maybe the only thing within walking distance is a 7-Eleven that sells Doritos and Slurpees and so on. So you're really talking about a cycle not only of it being expensive to be poor, but unhealthy to be poor. So I'm really glad you brought that up. Then you talk about getting paid, the problem getting paid.
Yeah, you not only have the problem of getting paid, but then you have the problem of not getting paid. The first one is getting paid, is that you've got to cash your check. Okay, that's one example of another part of the trap of being poor. Then there's even better than getting paid, though, is not getting paid because of wage theft. That is a huge problem that many of the people in the low end of things, they're very vulnerable, they're so dependent on the job, etc. Getting paid, places like Walmart now pay you with a debit card kind of thing, and you have fees. Unless you buy from Walmart, you have fees. So it's like a company store situation, and the debit card, has its fees and everything, and then not getting paid. You're forced to work overtime. Walmart got caught on that one, but other places too. You're forced to supposedly voluntarily sign away your lunchtime. Tips are a big one. If you work at a place where there's tips, your tips can get stolen. It's this pervasive problem, again, invisible to policymakers.
So you really, I have to say I really compliment you on this piece because it paints a vivid, which is available at Alternate and Swan, which paints a vivid picture of what it's like to be poor, and brought up some memories actually. But you talk about financial scams, which is connected to what you were saying about the difficulty getting paid and the debit cards and payday lenders and so on. And you also mentioned as number 8, and I really appreciated this, even the little things, laundromat.
Yeah, the laundromat. You have to go to a laundromat if you're poor. Once again, invisible to policymakers, another one of these kinds of things. Laundromats are another example. Low pay, of course. When you're poor, you end up in a low pay job, and then washing your clothes. You might have to purchase bottled water. Of course, everybody in West Virginia is purchasing bottled water right now, but you might have to purchase bottled water. That's another one. That's expensive because of where you live. So it is a trap that you fall into, and then once you start down the path of that, and all of the people living paycheck to paycheck understand now that they're one paycheck away, laid off, car problem, medical emergency, sick child, etc., from falling into this trap, then you fall into the trap. I really want to point out, before we run out of time,
sure,
and give out a big warning of one of the biggest problems of this trap, and that is debt. Because the minute you don't have enough money to get by, people then tend to borrow, especially people who are not particularly sophisticated about this. Is if you borrow money to get through this pay period, what's going to happen is that the next period you're going to be just as short as you were this period, but now you owe that money you borrowed plus some kind of phenomenal interest rate to whoever you borrowed that from, which means that you necessarily will fall further and further behind.
And this is, I mean, the company store is the ideal analogy on a national level. We're really talking about, a cycle of poverty and the ways that we get trapped in that. So, Dave Johnson, I want to thank you so much for joining us. We'll have you back. And as you wrote, inequality is costing us today. The 3,000 richest Americans make more than the poorest 23 million. That can only last so long. So Dave Johnson, Senior Fellow with the Campaign for America's Future, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you, Richard.
You bet. And we will be right back after this with more stories on how your world's really working. I'm R.J. Eskow, and this absolutely is the Zero Hour.